Hello there, everybody. Thanks for joining to this Capture One live session on this Friday afternoon. Thanks to everyone for joining today, and of course, thanks to Wex's team for organizing the event as always. I'm super happy and excited to be here today. It's actually my first live session of the year, which roughly starts in September, as everyone knows. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I hope this session is going to be useful for you guys. So basically today we're talking about wildlife editing. So we're going to go through 3 photos, and I'm going to show you tips and tricks on how to edit these kinds of photos in Capture One. If you're new to Capture One, I do recommend you take a look when this webinar is over to the previous sessions here at Wex's YouTube channel. We have done quite a few already since last year, and there was like introductory ones, one about workflow. So if you're new to Capture One and you wish to learn more, you're very welcome to explore Wex's YouTube channel, where we have created some content. Alright, so let's just jump straight back to the session, and first of all I'm going to explain you how we're going to be doing things today. So we have around 40 minutes for the webinar, and I will leave 5 minutes in the end for questions and answers, so roughly 3/4 of an hour. As you know, this is an interactive webinar and we are live, so I'm taking a look at the chat from time to time, and besides the questions in the end, if you have any questions related to what we are actually talking about as we go, don't hesitate, pop them up on the chat and I will try to answer them as I'm editing. And yeah, this webinar will be recorded, so in case that you don't have the time to watch all the way through, or you want to come back to it later, it's going to stay right here at the YouTube channel of Wex, and you can just interact. There is also someone from Wex in the chat, so any questions you have, just pop them out there. All right, so let's begin. Here is a couple of the points that I will be talking about today. As I said, we were doing wildlife edits, and the most important when we are editing animals is to make them really stand out of the photo, to really pop out, because it's going to be the most important element. Of course, there is going to be some context. That is probably the place where these animals are living. That is going to be more or less important depending on what's on the frame. But of course, we want our animals to really be on the spot. So we're going to see different tools on how to do this. Basically, there is some general rules to editing, and the tools that we have are the same for all kinds of photos. So basically, we're going to be making the subject stand through elements like composition, using lines, and of course using contrast of color and light and any other tools that we might have available in our editing software. As we are working in a raw file, as you know, the old edit is non-destructive. That means that we can always go back to what we used to have at the beginning. I'm going to be showing you in a moment some before and after, so to make you aware of what I mean if you're new to raw editing. So we're going to work with contrast. We're going to use curves for this. There is different options to adjust contrast in Capture One, but I do tend to work with curves because they give you so much more freedom to adjust your photos and to really have the look that you're aiming for. But I'm going to do this in a really laid-back way, so just very simple S-shaped curves. I'm going to get to them in a minute, so I'm sure that you won't be lost by it. And other tools that are going to help us to make our animals stand out of the photo, one very important one is vignettes. So vignettes are going to help us to shape light and color independently from the subject and the background. That's going to be very useful. We're going to play around with selective clarity and brightness to bring light to the places where we want to have it, and take some brightness off from the places where we don't want it. And last but not least, we have color grading as a tool to make our photos really personal and make them express what we really wanted to express. Let's not get lost on technicalities. When we are working with photos and we're working with editing, basically what we want to do is use all the tools that we have available to make sure that our photos convey the message that we want them to. In the end, when we are taking photos, it's because we like them and it's because we want to tell some stories, and editing is also going to be a tool that will allow us to do it. So there is no rules of thumbs. This is what I'm going to show you are just some tricks that you can completely adapt to your needs and to your tastes. So yeah, we're going to see different tricks, and then you can just do whatever works for you, or do whatever you feel that works better for your photos. So basically, there is that as an introduction for the session. I can already see some questions in the chat. There is some question about Pentax compatibility. That's actually a really great camera, so I hope that we do include some compatibility for that in the future. There is someone asking about subscriptions and purchase licenses. There is an option for a perpetual license, and Wex does have it on the website, so don't hesitate to go around and take a look. So without more, let's just jump on straight to the Capture One interface. This is what I have prepared for today. So I have 3 shots, as I said in the beginning. 2 of them were very kindly submitted by Wex's audience. So this last one is by my colleague David Grover. If you don't know him, he's got amazing Capture One tutorials at our Capture One YouTube channel. And if you're interested to learn more about Capture One, I suggest you go check them out. So basically, the 3 photos that I have today, I have prepared the before and after because I really wanted to show you how powerful editing can be when starting to face a photo. And okay, let's see what we can do with this. So the first image that I prepared for today is this beautiful cheetah shot and submitted by Govin. So thanks Govin for that. And this is the raw file as it came from camera. And this is my proposed edit. As you can see, basically I have been trying to really focus the attention on the animal, and of course to work a little bit on the highlights that we have here. They were a little bit on the edge, and honestly when I look at this photo I thought that couldn't be recovered, but I actually recovered quite a lot, so that was quite nice, honestly. So basically this is what I've been working with. Secondly, we have this photo shot by James. We're going to be taking a look at it, and then, well, you know, the other one you have already seen. So I'm just going to get straight on into the editing. So I'm going to hide my camera for a while. I will see you back in the end for the questions and answers. There's that. Okay, so now you can better focus on my screen. So basically, we have this photo, and the first thing that we want to do is to really take a look at it, and before even touching any of the sliders, before even touching any of the tools, just think about it and think what you want to do with it. So basically, when I look at this photo, I can see some highlights that need to be corrected in the sky. I can see a really wide frame, and probably we can benefit from having a little bit of a tighter frame. And then we have an uneven distribution of light, so there is quite a lot of light falling on the side of the tree. That is not the main focus of attention. The main focus of attention should be here. So that's what I'm going to try to do, and then I'm going to work around with color a little bit because I think that should be a little bit warmer maybe. That's of course up to taste. So this is what I came up with, but saying that as it is, it's no fun, so I'm just going to reset the whole image, and then we're going to see how I got there step by step. So basically, the first thing I want to do here, or the first thing that we should be looking at, is composition. In here we have a toolbar with different shortcuts to most used tools at Capture One. So I'm going to just grab the crop, and I'm going to adapt that. As you can see, I have different size ratios for my cropping. This one is maybe too panoramic, and I think that this one can benefit from 3/4, but as I said, sometimes when you are not very sure of what you want to do, it's just about testing, trial and error, and then you can really get to see what works. Because for example, like this, it might seem that it's going to work, but then you might realize that it's actually not. So I think something around there is going to be nice. And then I think that cropping wise, it should be okay. So let's just go ahead and start doing some editing. So I do recommend you follow an order of the tools, and as I said, there's nothing written on stone, but it did help me to understand what I have to look at in an image when I'm approaching editing. So I came up with this kind of layered workflow that I like to use over and over again, so you're going to see me talk about it a lot today, and I hope you're not intimidated by the use of layers. Layers in Capture One are completely integrated in the workflow. They are really intuitive and easy to use, and you're going to see that in a moment. So basically, the first thing I'm doing here is, instead of using my background, like I could just jump onto the background and start playing around with exposure, with contrast, whatever. Instead of doing that, I really like to start with one layer. Okay, and I'm just going to click and hold, and I have different options for different layers I can add. In this case, I'm going to start with a new field adjustment layer. So what does a fill layer mean? So it means that I have my new layer here. If I press M on my keyboard, that's a shortcut for show and hide mask, and we can see that there is already a mask that covers all of the image. That's exactly what I wanted to do. I'm not going to use a really defined mask in this case. I'm just going to mask everything out and use this layer as my basic adjustments. So basically I'm going to use it as my background. Why I do this? So the reason why I do this is because if I go too far with any of the adjustments, I have an opacity control, right? So I can choose to stay anywhere between 100% or 0% opacity. And that's really good when we are wanting to interact with layers and to create, to mask out different parts of the image. So basically, when my layer all set, I'm just going to start doing my basic adjustments. The first thing that we want to do here is obviously play around with the high dynamic range tool. You can see that it's quite on the edge, but you can also see that there was actually quite a lot of color information on this sky. The reason why you don't see any clouds or anything like that, it's because, well, there weren't any. And that makes this sky to be not so interesting, but we're trying to play around with color, with the color of the sky a little later on in the process. I really like to approach this as, you know, like from the general to the specific and then back to the general with ending up with some color grading. So for now, I'm just going to stay with the basic adjustments. So I'm going to recover some highlights. I'm going to play around with the curve. As I said, I really like to work contrast with the curve because it really gives me the control over what I want to do. So for example, we could start with a S-shaped curve. That's going to give us a little bit more of the brightness in the sky. That's also good because when we are facing an image like that, even if the sky is quite bright, we probably want it to stay bright. The reason behind that is that, well, the sky is a source of light in this image, so it shouldn't be darker than the foreground, right? I guess that makes some sense. And then when we're playing around with the curve, just by moving these points around, we can just really try to hit the point that works for us. I think that this is nice contrast for this image. If we feel that it's a little bit deep on the shadows, we can open them up just a bit by doing so. And I really like to work with this method because I feel like there is a lot of depth into shadows and highlights, but in the same time, there is detail everywhere. And it's really, really easy to compensate and to have more detail in certain areas of the image. I think that's quite nice. I'm also going to maybe warm it up just a little bit. Just like so. And just going to work with the tint a little bit. I think that's fine. So this is only basic adjustments, as I said. So this is the before and this is the after. If you want to check the before and after, when we are working with layers, we can just click on the layer. And if you want to see the before and after of the whole image, you have an option here in the menu, just like so. And then you have a full before after view, or if you prefer, there is a split view slider. And if you choose it, then you can just have an interactive view, and that is really useful in some cases. There is also a shortcut, letter Y, so that's actually quite useful. Right, so that would be the basic adjustment layer. There is a question on the chat, what camera does it not work with? There is a full list of camera compatibility in our website, and you can just check your camera if it works there or not. It's basically for most cameras on the market. Unfortunately, we can't cover them all for now, but it does work with most cameras. All right, so base is good. The next thing that I want to do here is work with a vignette. The reason why I want to do this is because I want to have more light on here on my subject than on the rest of the image. So there is, as I said in the beginning, quite a lot of light here, and a vignette, a soft vignette is going to help me address this problem without being so obvious. So in this case, I will create a new layer, and in this case, I'm not creating a new fill layer because I want to be able to design my own mask. So I'm going to choose a new empty adjustment layer. The difference between this fill layer, as you can see here, that I created before, the basic one, and this one, is that in here there is no mask at all. So it means that I have to create it myself. So I'm just going to grab my gradient tool, just like so. And I can play around with these lines to adjust the vignette as I want it to. I can play around, for example, with the gradient, so I can make a smoother gradient or a stronger one. I can rotate it to kind of accommodate. Yeah, let's do something like that. Something like that. Let's see. Okay, so I click M again to stop seeing the mask, and then I can just choose what tools I want to create the vignette with. So we can play around with brightness, for example. We can play around with exposure. We can play around with both, actually. And also in the lens, there's a nice trick here on the white side of things. I can just pull this little point up and move it around like so. That's going to be maybe a little bit too dark, but that's probably more a brightness thing. Okay, that's looking quite nice. So this is the before, this is the after, and it's really helping us to decide where we want to go with light-wise with this image. So another really useful trick is that we can, once that we created this layer for the vignette, we can just copy this mask and invert it to work with the opposite side of the image. So just going to create a new, again, empty layer, and then in this case I'm just going to right click on the layer, and there is a bunch of options opening up here. Not going to cover them all today, but just so you know that you can copy the mask from this layer, so that will be the same mask, and then right click again and invert mask. That's going to give us an opposite mask. It's going to work quite well. Just call it Cheetah. And now the reason why I did this is that we can just have some kind of opposite adjustments in here. And another really cool thing about working with layers is that you can apply clarity selectively. Why is this important? Because clarity is a really important tool to make your subjects pop. It's going to give you a nice crisp feel, but it's not going to work great if you apply it in the whole image. It's like, I always picture this in my head, like if you have a room full of people and you paint someone's face red, that person's going to stand out. But if you paint everyone's faces red, then no one's going to stand out. So with clarity, it's the same thing. It's something that you would rather apply on layers and on a selective part of the image. Looks like we didn't do anything, but it does do quite a lot. If we want to have a little bit of a crispier subject, we can also add some structure. That's going to help us with micro contrast, and that's looking actually quite nice. So there is still some kind of problem here. That is that this part of the sky is being affected by our clarity and our brightness. So we might want to leave that out. In that case, we can just grab our eraser tool and we can just delete the part of the mask that we don't want to have here. So just like that. And that gives us the possibility to have different masks for different purposes. And I think that works just great, actually. So I think that we're quite nice over here. I don't want to spend all the webinar in this photo. So I'm just going to give one last nice touch. There is a tool in Capture One 21 called Style Brushes, which is my new favorite tool in Capture One. And in here you have different built-in brushes for different purposes. There is one called Iris Enhance that's going to be perfect for this. So basically we can just grab this brush, and there is already some pre-made adjustments into here that are going to let us really work with the eyes of this nice cheetah. So just like so, you have much more depth on the look. And okay, it's a leopard. Thanks, John, because I am not an expert in wildlife, so it's nice. I really don't know the difference between both of them, so if you want to type them up on the chat, then we can all learn something else that is not Capture One. So that would be the before, and that would be the after. It's not exactly what I did before, but I think it works just the same, really. There is not two edits that are the same. That doesn't mean that there is just one good way to do stuff. And that is also the magic of editing, I guess. All right, so we're done with this one. Let's move on to the next. We have this photo sent by James, and I thought it was interesting as an example of how we can shoot something that it's actually nice and without having to go too far away, without having to, because when we are thinking of wildlife photography, sometimes we're thinking like, okay, you have to go to the savannah in Africa and you have to pay an incredible amount of money to go there and have some nice animals. I think this photo is nice proof that it's not always so. There is animals everywhere, there's animals in the cities. This is maybe just a park, I don't know the context of the image, but this looks to me like a pond in a park. And everywhere can be a good place to have a nice image. So I actually really like this photo because the camera settings are right on place. So we have a really crisp duck, and also we have some parts of the water that are kind of frozen but not really, so it lets us know that there is movement into this photo, right? It's not completely static, it's not completely frozen, and I think this works well in this case. So this is the edit I came up with. So even if it seems here that it's not on focus completely, it is on focus. What we had around here was probably some dust or some particles of water that were making it look like not so on focus. But as you can see here, there is pretty nice detail into this photo. We just need to give it some love. So let's just show the process I did before. So first of all, as you can see here, I'm going to try to follow this exactly the same scheme of process of going through things. So first, again, I'm going to do the cropping. That's going to be 16:9 in this case. Let's go for a panoramic photo. Just like so. I like to do the panoramic here because it does create a nice horizontal line. So there is that. All right. So yeah, that's in a local park. That's so funny, but that's a really good shot. So if you're the author or the author is around there, then congrats on this. And the same as I did before, as you can see, I'm going to repeat myself a lot. So just new field adjustment layer. And again, I'm going to give it a name. That's going to be basic adjustments. So what basic adjustments we want to do here? You're going to see that by starting with a curve, that is going to give us some nice contrast, and that is actually what's giving us the depth and that's making the details stand out in this photo. It just needed a little bit of contrast. It was looking a little bit washed, but once that we give some contrast back to it, it really starts being something. So sometimes it's just about contrast, and light and photography is all about contrast between lights and shadows and different complementary colors. So that's what we're going to see in a minute. So that's a nice contrast to start with. We want to also recover some highlights here, well, maybe a lot of highlights, because there is also nice detail in the water. So if we zoom in here also, you can see that it's not completely frozen, but there is indeed detail into here. Let's also play around with white balance. Let's try to make it a bit cooler. And then we're going to be talking about the color of the water in a second. So basically, the color of the water is something that we might be looking. It might be worth taking a look at, because it's looking green and it's probably the reflection of the trees on the water. But we might want to play around with the tone of green a little bit, and just to make it a little bit maybe cleaner, if you like. So let's just try to make this green a little bit more pure, and that's going to maybe help this photo look like a little bit better. So in order to do this, we might want to make a mask with the color green. So there is some tools in Capture One that are really good for this. In this case, I'm just going to go over here to my background, and then we have a tool called the Advanced Color Editor. And that color editor is allowing me to select a color range, so just like so, and then we can define exactly what colors we want to affect. So something like there. This tool is going to allow us to see what the actual part of the image we selected. And instead of working just from the color editor, what I'm going to do is, there is a really cool option, but it's hidden here in the menu, so you might want to be aware of it. And this option is called Create Mask Layer from Selection. So I'm going to choose this one, and Capture One is just going to be thinking for a second, and then it created automatically a new layer. And in this layer, there is a mask that is covering these colors in the photo. So that's great, because it's going to allow us to really work on the water without working on the splashes. So if you see here, for example, and I press N to see the mask, there is actually a really cool mask. We can also refine it, sorry, if there is something we might want to do with it. And maybe we want to also add this part in. We're going to see that in a minute. So once that this is set, I'm just going to click on the color editor again. And in this case, the reason why I did the mask is because if needed, I can work with other tools. But for now, I'm just going to focus on the color editor. So once that is masked, I can just work around with the hue, the saturation, and the brightness. So I'm just going to try to make it look like a little bit of a deeper green. Not so saturated, probably. So something around there. And maybe we want to make it a little bit darker too. Something around there. So let's take a look at the before and after. I think that having a cooler green, it's making it look not so much like a park, but maybe more like a forest. So we have sometimes you need to think beyond of what you can actually see in the picture, and you need to imagine a little bit further. So if we have this kind of green, it does look more like the trees or the bushes that we can find in a park. If we make it look like a deeper green, it resembles, to me at least, more like the kind of vegetation, the kind of flora you would find in a forest with taller trees and the deeper colors. So yeah, this is what I thought for this photo. Maybe we can also cool it down even a little bit more, just from the color balance, and this is why it's important to have it in a different layer, because then you can be free to work with different tools, and I think that is normally just really cool. So next thing that we want to do in this photo, if you remember the style brushes that I was talking about before, there is a couple more interesting options. So there is one for light and contrast, and then we can find different cool stuff in here. So we have a dodge and burn brush, we have a dehaze and rehaze tool, and in this case what interests me is the add brightness tool, because it's a really simple way to play around with brightness and to give some nice color and light contrast to our images just by brushing in. So it's a similar thing what I did with the eyes of the leopard before, but in this case I'm just going to choose a bigger brush, and I'm going to just paint in a little bit of extra brightness in here. So just like that, that's going to give us a little bit more brightness into our lovely duck here. And I can use the same mask, as you can see. I don't know if you can see it actually, because it's a really, really soft mask, and this is what I like precisely about style brushes. So there is a really subtle mask going on in here, and it's not perfect, and it doesn't have to be, because it's just basically going to be a shape of light and a shape of clarity. If you remember what I said before about clarity, this mask is also going to help us to add some extra clarity into our subject. That's going to make it really stand out. And that's going to be a very simple process actually. So 2-in-1, brightness plus clarity. And the next thing we want to do is again a simple vignette. So with another empty adjustment layer and the vignette tool, the radial gradient. So let's click M and let's see how we can make it adapt. I'm going to choose a really, really smooth vignette for this. I'm going to also rotate it a bit more and partially cover the trail of water, just like so. Okay, and now I'm just going to use this little trick I showed you before with the levels tool, so just reducing the white output. That's going to give us a really smooth vignette. And you can see just by using these two tools combined, we can really focus the attention where we want it to. And to end this with this photo, there is just some really, really cool thing that I always or almost always use to finish my edits, which is the color balance tool. In this case, I'm creating again a new fill adjustment layer. If you remember what I said before, we're going from the general, so the basic adjustments and the water, which is 90% of this image, to the specifics, so the brightness and the vignette, and then we're finishing again with the generic. So again, a filled mask that is going to allow us to edit the whole image, but in a different layer. The reason why I do this is because I'm going to use this layer for color grading, and it's quite easy when we are really into the image to go a little bit crazy with color. So the reason why I put it in another layer is because, as I said, I can control the opacity. So let's work a bit with this tool here, the color balance. It's a really useful and intuitive tool, and it's one of my favorites because it's just simple to use. And we have these 3 color wheels here, and you might be intimidated by it at first, but don't worry, because it's really, really useful, and it's really, you can just play around with it basically until you find something that works for you. So we have a split toning for shadows, midtones, and highlights. So for the shadows, I'm going to choose a cooler tint, just like a bluish tint, and then once we have chose the tone, we can apply it like more harshly or more softly. So I think somewhere around there, that's going to work for us. And then we can just play around with the highlights too. And something that actually works really well is to create a complementary color contrast. So if we're going cool in the shadows, we want to go warm on the highlights, just a little bit. Something around there. And that's before our color grading and after our color grading. And I really feel that this tool is making a difference between what is the camera colors or what it came straight out of camera and what we want it to be, and it's going to help us tell our story. So that's it with the second photo. I hope you enjoyed the edit. Let's move on to the next and final for today. So we have this lovely, if I remember correctly, because David told me, this is a bleeding heart monkey. I'm not going to get the wrong animal now, I hope. And thanks, David, for sharing this amazing photo with me so I can do this edit. As I said, if you are into Capture One and you want to learn more, David's got a bunch of really cool, useful tutorials in Capture One's YouTube channel. So this is it before, this is the image as it came out of camera, and this is what I'm trying to aim for. Basically, it's almost the same as I did, it's just going to be adapted to different parts of the image. So, as always, resetting the adjustments, and let's see how we can go from one to the other. First of all, cropping again, so 2/3 in this case. I'm going to go for the natural rate, something like there. I really like to use here my 2/3 composition. Maybe it's a little bit classic, but I really find that it works. And now I'm going to go to my basic adjustments layer. So same thing as I did before. You can see that I repeat a ton of stuff, but that's good because then you can create your workflow and then you can have a kind of mental checklist of what you're always doing, and that is going to maybe give you some ideas on what to do when you are facing a photo. And then I'm sure that some of you have experienced this thing like, okay, I have this photo here, but I don't know what to do with it. It already looks good to me. So having a method and having an order to look at things is always helpful. I mean, at least it was helpful for me. So yeah, let's get started with this one. As for the basic tools, I'm just going to again use a little bit of the HDR panel, something like there. We want to have nice detail, we want to have nice contrast in the same time. Going to saturate this a bit, and then we're going to see what we do with color. We might want to add just a little bit of clarity to the whole thing, but not a lot. And probably we also want to have a little bit of a curve. See that in this case I'm using a Luma curve because there is a lot of green in the image and really bright green. And then if we're not careful with the RGB curve, let's just use this one for the sake of argument. Let's just see what happens. The RGB curve is going to give us some extra saturation, and that's going to make these greens and reds look kind of unnatural. And I wanted to think, like, sometimes when you don't know what to do to a photo, it actually helps to kind of make up a backstory. So I like to think that this monkey is like meditating or something, and that it's in its own world, not minding so much what's happening around it. So I'm going to try to aim for more like a moody look. So Luma curve is going to be good for that because it would allow us to have extra contrast without the extra saturation. That's why I compensated also a little bit of the saturation here. So something around there might be nice. And once we finish with the curve, as you can see, I'm always using curves for contrast, but most times I'm just using a really, really simple S-shaped curve. If you're new to curves, I suggest you start with this one. All right, so just a little bit more of the shadow opening up thing. You know what, I'm going to leave shadows just as they are here, because if I open them up a lot, that's going to give me nice detail on the subject here, but it's also going to give me a lot of fill light that I don't necessarily want in the background and on the rock where he's standing. So I'm just going to approach this in a different way. Okay, so that being my base, just a little bit more. Okay, that's good. So that being my base, I'm really happy about how the background's looking like, but I need to open up a little bit more of the shadows here on my subject. So guess what? I'm going to use another style brush. These are all pre-made style brushes, just wanted to make it clear. This is found always on Capture 121, nothing fancy that I created myself. You can just use them as they are, and they are super helpful. So as you can see, it's really intuitive actually. What do I want to do here? Shadows, recover. Okay, so I'm going to click here. That's going to pick my brush. That's selected my tool. I just want to now adjust size. Regarding flow and opacity and hardness and other stuff, when you're using style brushes, it's already preset, so you don't really need to worry even about what those are. If you're interested, we can have another session, another day, and I can really go through brushing. But for now, just worry about size. And when you start brushing in, magic starts to appear, and we are bringing back all of this nice detail in the shadows. We don't want to overdo it though, because otherwise it might look like, you know, a lot of fill light is going to give us a really strange impression. But other than that, you can just do it as you consider best. And the cool thing about working with layers and non-destructive editing is that, well, you know, you can just go back to what you used to have. That's always going to be a choice for you. So I actually prefer to overdo it a bit here and maybe tune down the opacity a bit. And then if with other adjustments that is, you know, needing to go back, then I can just pull the opacity up again. For now, I'm going to leave it around 75 roughly. That is the before and after of the layer. So that is going to work really well, I think. Okay, so I recovered my shadows. The next thing I want to do is add the detail. For that, I'm going to use another style brush that is called exactly that, Add Detail. So again, very intuitive. And Add Detail brush is going to add a mix of clarity and structure, and it's going to really work out great. So same thing again, not worrying about flow or hardness or anything else, just going to, in this case, I'm going to have a bigger brush, because it's not so size sensitive as recovering shadows. So that's just going to give us a little bit of a pop out effect. And I really like this brush because it really gives the idea of detail and without completely ruining by some too much clarity the rest of the photo. Again, I'm going to tune down the opacity a notch, so around 85%. I think that's going to be looking good. Just like so. I can see David's around the chat. Hey colleague, hope you are enjoying my version of your photo. All right, so we're fine around here. I think I'm going to pull up the shadows just a bit more here. And once I have done this, I'm going to create a vignette again. I almost always use vignettes because it's a really cool way and natural way of directing the look of the person who is watching your photo actually, without it being too obvious. Well, if we are careful and we are not making it too obvious, because a really harsh vignette or a wrongly placed vignette can completely ruin a photo. But if we do it just the right way, which is not so hard with all of these controls, I think that it's a really cool way to handle things. So let's go down a little bit of the highlights, maybe just not the highlights but the brightness. And I'm going to do this kind of little trick again with the whites, something like there. I think I want to recover more shadows actually. Maybe I was a little bit too conservative after all. So I can just come back to the same layer and brush in again if needed. Okay, that's looking quite nice. There is just a couple last things I want to do here before finishing this photo. First of all, I want to tune down a little bit more this rock over here because it's kind of distracting and it's not giving me too much, anything too interesting. So same as we have radial gradients, we also have linear gradients, and I think that's going to be great for this case. And I can also just adjust it as needed, rotation, and also the hardness of the gradient can be adjusted, so something like so, just like that. And then I can just reduce a little bit more of the brightness. And I think I really want to cool it down a bit because the monkey has really nice warm colors on the fur, and it's kind of bothering me that this rock is also a little bit yellowish. So just going to cool it down a bit. As you can see, we might need to readjust the gradient afterwards, just like so. And just as I did before with the cheetah, keep in mind that you can also delete from the mask whatever is bothering you just by rasterizing it. That's going to be automatic when you pick your erasing brush. So, and then you can roughly get rid of the things that you don't need on this mask. Okay, alright, I think that's actually looking better. It's barely affecting the rest of the photo. If we went a little bit too far, we might want to recover that a bit. And I think that quite worked. Alright, so one last thing I want to do with this photo is apply my color mask. So new fill adjustment layer again, and that's going to be my color grading. Before jumping onto the color balance, and I'm going to make a pretty similar adjustment to what I did before, there is one last thing I want to do color-wise. In this case, I'm going to grab my color editor because this green in the background is kind of too bright. It's too saturated still, and it's kind of taking too much attention to what should be going to our bleeding heart monkey here. So in this case, I'm just going to choose the basic color editor, which is the simplest one to use, and I'm going to just choose the green colors. And I'm going to desaturate them a bit. I'm going to warm them up maybe just a little bit. Sometimes it might look like the problem is saturation when the problem is actually hue or brightness or a mix of the three elements. So just by going a little bit more toward the left on these three sliders, that's going to give us a really nice look. So I think that green tone is kind of blending better together with the image, and I think that gives us nice base to work with color. And to end this up, again, I'm going to pick a cooler tone for the shadows and some warmer highlights. I think that's really creating this kind of, you know, as I said, sometimes you just need to make up the backstory. So I think that really fits the mood of this bleeding heart yoga meditating monkey. Alright, so this is before and after again. So this would be my final version, and I think I'm right on time. So let's just move ahead to questions and answers. I'm going to bring my camera back so I can answer to the screen. Okay, here I am. So this was the 3 edits of the day. Hope you enjoyed them. Just going to leave them here. While you think of your questions, there is also a little bit of a delay, so it might take a little bit of time to come on. Alright, so let me take a look at the chat, which I've been looking at, but I can see some new things appeared actually. So there is one from Steve regarding tether or live view. He's asking, can I see it works tether and live view with phase 1 cameras? Is there a reason it cannot work tether or live view with many other brands cameras? I can see David already responded to that, and actually tethering and live view is supported for most Canon, Nikon, like Sony and Fuji models, so might have been like that in the past, but we've actually come a long way in terms of camera support, and basically now not, as I said, 100% of cameras on the market, but we are doing our best to really try and support most cameras on the market. So yeah, alright, so there is also a bit of sky replacement, maybe in the future, who knows. And David also saying that this was shot, if anyone is interested, with Fuji X-T3 and the 200mm lens with a teleconverter. Nice. Alright, so let me know if there are any questions. Otherwise, we can just move on to the end of this webinar, but I'm giving a couple more minutes though. I kind of feel that I didn't work enough with the color here, so while you come up with something, I'm just going to add my color grading thing here. It's going to show you how another combination of colors might look like. So let's do, in this case, warmer shadows and cooler highlights. Just like so. Alright. That's looking better. Sometimes it's cool to just play around with shadows and highlights. Sometimes you might want to include the midtones. I generally not doing that because I feel like if you start to throw too much stuff in there, it's going to look like a little bit more dirty, so to say. Okay, I think there is a question from KGS. When I edit my photos, I tend to crop in much closer. Is there a principle to guide me when to crop in close versus when to leave a bit more of the background? Thanks. So basically, as I said in the beginning, there is no rules of thumb. There is suggestions and guides for cropping and guides for composition. But in the end of the day, nothing's written on stone, and it's just up to you how closer you want to crop your images, or if you want to leave a little bit more of the background. Generally, if the background's interesting or it's adding up some information to the image, so like if it's providing a context, we might want to have it. So for example, here there was not much crop-wise to do because the rest of the background is also a plain blue sky and a tree, and we also already have it here. So this is why in this case I closed it down a little bit more. In this case, I left it more open because I think that the background is adding something to the story that we want to tell. So that's generally up to you. If the background's not super interesting and it's not adding anything up, don't be afraid to go as close as you can if that's what you want and that's what you like. There is nothing that is wrong or right per se. All right. You can see more questions coming up. Would you see Capture One as an alternative to Lightroom or complementary? From David Harrison. I think, Lightroom is our competitor. That's no secret to anyone. And I think that Capture One is pretty good as a standalone software. By legacy, there are some new Capture One users who are still using Lightroom for cataloging. It's true that catalogs with Capture One, they were not as native as Sessions were in the past, but cataloging in Capture One has improved massively in the past 2 versions. So some users that might not have tried the new Capture One catalogs to its fullest might still be using Lightroom for cataloging or keywords and stuff like that. But the fact is that I wouldn't say that there is anything catalog-wise that you can do in Lightroom that you can't do in Capture One. Lightroom has some other functionalities that are not into Capture One as well, but image-wise, editing-wise, and cataloging-wise, I think that you can do pretty much the same. Okay, Harshita is, sorry about that if I didn't pronounce correctly. How can I take amazing photos of birds? Give me a tip. I'm actually not a wildlife photographer, and as much as I love birds, I love watching the photos of super expert photographers, I don't think I'm the right person to give you tips for an amazing bird photography. So Wex, maybe take some notes because that might be your next session. And last 2 questions. Do you have any tools that can help separate the monkey from the background, for example, as this is a problem I often have, especially with wide angle lenses? So if you mean like masking out the monkey, yes, there is tools that you can use. There is, for example, in this case, I would just do some brushing, and there is like an auto mask feature that might help you do that. And then you have also the refine and feather mask features that are going to be great for masking out all of these hairs. So I suggest that you start by there. And last question, do the layers flatten automatically when the image is exported? Well, yeah, because this is Capture One layer, so basically all of these layers exist in Capture One as Capture One information. So whenever you're exporting these images, these layers, so to say, they live in the raw file in Capture One. So once you export this to any kind of image format like JPEG or TIFF or PSD, you're going to lose the ability to work with these layers in other softwares. But you can, of course, always come back to Capture One. So maybe I didn't quite get the question, but what you mean is if now I export this is a Fuji raw file. If now I export this to JPEG, for example, the JPEG is not layer editable, but you can always come back to the file. This is what I meant when I said that raw editing is non-destructive. It means that the raw file is here, it's living in Capture One, and you can always come back to it. Alright, so I think that will be all for today. I wanted to use the chance to thank you all once again for following the whole thing. If you missed some bits and parts of it, remember that it's going to be staying here, recorded at Wex's YouTube channel. Thanks a ton for watching. Thanks to Wex for hosting us today. I hope that we can get to do some more sessions before the end of the year. I'll be glad to do it. And well, see you the next time. Remember to comment in the chat if you liked it and share it with someone who might like it. And see you on the next session. Bye!